There's a dragon in every community. Scales, fire, chaos. We sometimes label them as trolls. Sometimes our first instinct is to silence them, exile them, to keep the peace, erase the threat. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You've tuned into Clocktower Advisors Talk About Your Community. And I'm Todd, your host. If you're here for the first time, welcome. I'm very glad you're here. We've got an extremely special show set up for today. My guest is Dr. Ruth Diaz, who is an expert in the topics of moderation and VR spaces and really kind of building safe spaces that are inclusive online for everyone. My intro got cut off a little bit, but I think you get the idea that this is about sort of the discomfort of people that are a little trollish in online spaces and how we make or break a community based on how we interact with these individuals and the opportunities that are around that. So I'm glad you're here. This is an interactive show. So if you are in the chat, I want to hear from you. I want to know what's on your mind. If you've got questions for Dr. Diaz, please share them in the comments. And we will maybe even promote some of them up on the screen as we go through our conversation here today. But before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. This show streams live on LinkedIn every other Friday at 10 a.m. US Central Time. It simultaneously streams over to YouTube, where we have the full back catalog of channels of shows available to you, so you can check out what we do there. And more recently, we are also syndicating past episodes of the show up on your favorite podcasting networks. And so you can go ahead and check out all of our great past interviews that we had up on Spotify or Apple or whatever platforms you like to use to listen to stuff while you're out mowing the lawn or at the gym or taking a walk out in nature. And I hope you are. So please check those out. Always appreciate subscriptions, comments, shares. Thank you all, for your support on those things. And then looking forward, we got some wonderful shows that are coming up in August. And so mark your calendars, and we'll be getting the notifications of these up on LinkedIn here on the Clocktower Advisors company page. Jillian Belich from Calendly is going to be coming on the show as, I think, a triumphant follow-up to her wonderful presentation at London Community Week on correlations between architecture, like physically designing buildings and spaces in public, and the online virtual communities that we build. She and I had a wonderful conversation about this a month or two back. She built the presentation for the Community Week Summit event in London, and she's coming here to nerd out with me a little bit more about how we thoughtfully design spaces for people to meet. I'm sure Dr. Diaz may have some thoughts about that as well. And then coming up on August the 22nd, I have another guest, Brian Fretwell, who's going to be, I think, maybe continuing some of the themes of today's conversation, building trust and clarity in the online spaces that we happen to work in. So be sure to make time and space in your schedule for this on a Friday. Grab your favorite beverage and sit back and go ahead and get into some really interesting topics on that front. But now, without further ado, I want to bring on the screen and welcome Dr. Diaz. Welcome. It's so great to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So your unique lens on the complexities of technology and your professional identity, the work that you do, I'm really curious about how maybe that informs your approach to community building and sort of how these virtual digital spaces have an impact on how we interact with each other as humans. Because it's very different than sitting across a table from someone, and whether we're connecting online via video or via a VR environment or via text seems to matter a lot.
It does, yeah. Yeah, so I hear the question as what is my context that is approaching this problem behavior in online communities, and how do those spaces that we just have to accept, we don't have a lot of negotiation with how much of my body is going to be shown, et cetera, in professional or online interactions. But we are losing information through that. And so I have a background in clinical psychology and have transitioned from being a therapist to working and consulting around conflict resiliency, which naturally led to community design and community architecture for uh, communities that need more conflict resiliency and emotional fluency than others. And what I found is that the more black and white the medium, where we connect with each other, as in, are we looking at black and white letters as some representation of who somebody is, a comment, a sentence? Are we looking through poorly lighted or not lighted screens? Maybe we can hear voices, but we can't see each other. Um, are we using avatars in some respect to represent us? And how do those avatars impress or repel each other? Those pieces on a gradient of potential for misunderstanding um, increase the likelihood of conflict. In community systems, friction is a good thing. Friction gets energy and synergy going. And there's also consequence to friction. Some people are repelled by the friction. Um, but when we get to full out conflict, that's where the projections, the stories we tell ourselves about each other that are very unconscious, that's where those kick in and become reaction instead of responding. And so, yeah, I work with virtual spaces partly because I think that they are the most kind of downstream version of what's happening in our online communities. So I help grow immersive communities that are like in headsets or have avatars representing them on their screens while other people are in headsets. And what I find is that we have all been trained by the social media machines before we get into those places. But then the full effect of telling somebody, I erase you entirely, I mute you, I block you, I report you, the fluidity of that practice in our online communities that are 2D and just text or whatever really has a gladiator effect in immersive reality, where people feel slaughtered by the uh, coldness, or shall I say, ruthlessness of online behaviors. Yeah.
So I want to reflect on that for a second because I think that like I is it because when I've invested in the personalization of an avatar
Mm.
that there's somehow more of myself invested in that than in maybe like a text-based community space?
Yeah, so I think what it's doing is it's allowing us to have more emotions. It's allowing us to be creative, and having made a choice of I chose the blue avatar versus the pink avatar, or I chose a skin color versus an animal cover or whatever. All of those yes nos say something about me. And everybody has this knowledge of going, you made some consent to that, and it isn't your I was born with this form. So it has a louder message. And and then it also has that queuing up of playing with cars or dolls or whatever as a kid, and putting our energy into that and making the rah, rah, rah sounds or whatever else. Like, it allows us to feel more and gives a bit more permission to express it, like as an archetype of sorts,
Yeah.
imagining what that thing would be saying instead of what I would say to a friend in front of me right now.
And I love the creative element of that, like especially in VR type space. And I played in online games and places where I've been able to customize how I choose to appear in those spaces. Um, I think the lens through which I've often looked at it is that it's playing with identity,
Mm-hmm.
and like I'm choosing to express myself in maybe a way that's a little riskier than I normally would in a face-to-face context. And that's I I've always sort of looked at that as essentially mostly a healthy behavior.
Can
Like
be.
I'm trying on new false faces to see like, hey, are there elements of this that I can bleed into my regular day-to-day identity? What I appreciate about your work is thinking about the context of how that affects others in the
Mm-hmm.
space and how
Yeah.
they interact with each other and how, like, I mean, I guess, do we need guidelines about what's okay to represent yourself as when you're coming into a VR space? I guess I wonder about. And by the way, for those of you tuning in, and that this is about online communities, I'm going to get into more straight corporate branded, communities as well in this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. But I'm really fascinated by the VR space because I feel like it's a space we're moving into. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a good disclaimer. I think that in virtual communities, there are different rule sets for every space. It almost feels like landing on different planets, um, there's literally a common way to talk about moving between spaces in an application as world hopping. That
Mhm.
each user generated space is a world, uh, and so when I've traveled with people from one application to another, where one application might only allow human skin colors and a consistency of like presentation that are their avatars versus another app that fully embraces user generated avatars. So you can be a houseplant, like literally last night, an afterglow of an event I was doing, there was a dragon that turned into Godzilla that was going after a house plant. And these were just two people that were being playful and running around role playing as these full, like, that Godzilla was better than any of the movies I'd seen. Um, so I think that allowing for that creativity gives people a sense of belonging and presence. And it can also create a lot of chaos because we are all coming from cultures that we have never consciously processed. And those cultures told us in different ways what is right and good and bad and wrong. And so when our values, when those lenses crash into each other, having some common ground of avatars or guidelines or culture around that will help us kind of find that middle bridge is really important. But the more creative the avatar, the more that can unleash and disinhibit us, at least initially, when we get into these spaces that are literally telling us to disconnect from our bodies.
Mhm.
And that's not just VR. Actually, being on this camera with you, we're not face to face. I'm a bobblehead right now, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
so that becomes its own kind of avatar. Your brain is going to start to fill in the details of what's around me and who I am as I talk. And it gives you a sense of place making for me, but they might not be true. And some of those beliefs that come up um, unconsciously can really determine how we turn friction into healthier connection or unravel on each other.
Mhm. One of the past guests on the show who was doing a VR style app, talked about just levels of immersion. That
Mhm.
from VR goggles to a screen in which I'm in a virtual world to um, a chat room. Or even asynchronous chat. Like there's just there are limitations to how many signals we have that we can put through based on the sort of platform we're in.
Mhm.
Um, do you find yourself gravitating towards the VR world because, and maybe you already said this, because that you're seeing some of the richest possibilities for interaction or creativity in those
Yeah,
spaces?
that's a good way to put it. So right now, I am spending a lot of my time for the last year or so investing in building a group called Bridge Makers, and this is a manifestation and a next version of a community design concept. How do we build real communities, communities with the capital C, inside of for-profit spaces? Either just we don't have any brand or for-profit motives within us, but the application we're in does. And so that influences how we take care of each other versus create a hierarchy of who gets access to resources first. Um, and I think that virtual spaces are basically a collective dream state. Um, we all dream every night, whether we remember our dreams or not. And we also have nightmares every night. And that's queuing up in us for hours every day, this lifelong habit we've had. And then when we go into these immersive spaces, it's going to cue up that freedom in us to explore our identities and really be curious about, kind of like trying to flip over a playing card or whatever. What's on the other side? Who's this person underneath? Every interaction becomes a quest to learn more. It's a very intense, the more immersed you get, way of doing a Russian roulette social matching,
Mhm.
because I literally met somebody in Russia, 2 weeks ago in VR talking about. I was there talking about bridge makers, and they were there telling me about being a contractor for the war, and their certainty that um, they couldn't comment on the war because they were profiting off of it, but they didn't need it to end anytime soon. And to feel that kind of opinion very close to my body in an avatar, I think he was also kind of intoxicated, but it was a whole world in that moment, right? And I think because I bring such a presence of curiosity and genuine listening, I have enough muscle and practice to not necessarily feel immediately repulsed by that, and just go, thank you for your honesty, wow, what's it like to be you,
Yeah.
and and I think there's incredible opportunity to face the living history that we would never have access to otherwise, or interest in learning, in this like international intersection of people at any given moment. And it also has incredible harm when the design of it is made for profit only and doesn't keep um, investing in people who have expertise in social dynamics. uh, I think that what can happen is people almost become like ants trapped in invisible boxes, and they came because something was attractive there, but they lost their way in all the wounding that happened as they interacted with people, and then they get stuck.
We're with Dr. Ruth Diaz, who is running bridgemakers.world, and Kalisa can probably pop that up on the screen here for us for any of you that would like to explore that. We're talking about virtual worlds and online communities and how we moderate these spaces with more humanity and curiosity. I liked how you brought that in, and I think it kind of brings us to maybe one of the main topics of the conversation here today. How do we work through situations where there is someone who is spouting fire, metaphorically, in the community in which we happen to be, whether it is a VR space, a gaming space, or whether it is a corporate
Mhm,
branded community,
mhm,
where someone for whatever reasons is attacking others or making others feel attacked, maybe
mhm,
maybe more to the point. How do we start dealing with those? And I know really kind of a central tenet of what you talk about, and what I had the delight of hearing about in the All Things in Moderation conference a month or two ago, is that you work from the perspective of curiosity and interest, as opposed to bringing down the hammer
Mhm.
on those individuals. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about your approach and how you maybe came to that.
Yeah, thank you. So I study archetypes, which is the behavior. It's archetypes means a common set of behaviors that we all agree can show up in almost anybody, at least temporarily. So a villain is an archetype, a class clown is an archetype, a parent can be an archetype of sorts. And so using that understanding that sometimes our behaviors can change briefly as almost a reflection of the social environment more than a reflection of our personality that is more consistent. Then loosening that frame allows me to look at the system itself, the structures, the onboarding processes. Um, you use the metaphor of fire, or no, I think you said is making people feel unsafe. And I thought of the metaphor of fire. Um, and what can happen is when people smell smoke, they instantly assume there's a, what is the kind of person who sets fires to things? Pyro.
Pyromaniac, yes.
Yeah, there's pyromaniac around because I smell smoke. Instead of saying, we're a community, maybe this is a campground. Did somebody get dinner started? And so there's I think to some degree, a shared permission to see people as numbers first and humans second, especially when we talk about communities at scale. And I do conflict resiliency work instead of conflict resolution work. When we put the word resolution after conflict, all we're doing is stating our collective fear and anxiety. We're like, conflict, resolve it. Like we just want to push it back down.
Damn, done. Right.
Never there in the first place. We made a mistake, right? And resiliency says conflict is what grows us. And so I'm going to expand my metaphor because I teach in metaphors quite a bit to say that trees, excuse me, trees would never have grown above about a foot tall, according to evolutionary scientists, without category 5 storms uh, washing them for like a million years.
strengthening
The
the
storm
DNA. Yeah.
grew us bigger, made us reach the sky better. And the storms and friction between us, yes, can bring smoke about, but it doesn't mean that that fire is going to burn everybody unless the climate and the culture has not been developed to be able to absorb that kind of fire. And so a lot of what we call community online is actually closer to audiences or users. And it's not a two-directional street, and yet companies will many times want to frame communities with that word because it can feel really good to think I'm not just making a product, I'm making a better place in the world. But there are specific elements of recognizing and cultivating community that require investment and also require a culture check within the company itself on how they're doing in building community. If the company's culture does not have that shared sense of belonging, the online community will mirror the rupture there and the depletion. So,
I,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I love that. One of the members of the Community Consultants Collective that I'm involved with, Seth Ressler, comes from broadcast media space, and a lot of his central messaging is about recognizing that you're stuck in this mentality of audience, like
Yeah,
performance versus community, which is multi-directional interaction. Like if you don't
yeah,
have that, you can't really become a
yeah,
community. You're just broadcasting
yeah.
out to someone else. And I've even been thinking about like just sort of the misuses of the word community
Exactly.
over a period of years, really since I've been involved in
Yeah,
community, where we're applying community to big social media spaces
Mm,
where I
mm,
think that it's hard to apply that definition meaningfully
mm,
to X or
mm,
to Instagram, even though there may be elements of
mm,
community feeling or belonging in those spaces. They are largely low trust, transactional, ephemeral
mm,
spaces.
mm.
Not that they can't be more, but that like the architecture is not conducive to
Mm.
maybe making as deep a connections, in those
Mhm.
sorts of places.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's really well put. I look at when I do consulting and support for community management at a corporate and professional level, I I look at it like we are trying to connect through a window that is then attached to a telescope that then looks into a microscope. And then there's a person right in the little petri dish of that. And we're trying to have a whole conversation with that person. There's a lot of squeeze to limiting us in the necessary details we have evolved as human beings to need to empathically relate to each other. And especially in professional roles like community management, it is a numbers game. And it is a sense of having to be a mediator, not necessarily between the community members, especially at a high scale when we're talking thousands or even millions, having to be a mediator between the community itself and the company,
mhm.
and being that connector to try to get the most needs met for that community, but also understanding the anxiety and concerns and goals of that company and figuring out where that middle is. So I have a lot of compassion for how difficult it is to build a real culture of community. And I encourage people to just reframe the idea of making almost like a sterile and clean space in whatever group they are fostering and nurturing. Because even though that is more controlled and therefore more predictable, it doesn't allow for the sparks needed for people to start to take care of each other within an online space, whether it's a forum or a virtual world or a Zoom call. We are all still trying to link up and take care of each other whenever we can.
I hope that we are. I hope that we are. Um,
We want to
so,
be successful, right? So if I can say one thing more thing there, I've been exploring a online game for how it has designed its community. It's called Palia, and it's like a farming, hunting, gardening, making really cozy, cute homes, little dollhouse kind of feeling, but
I love
full
that.
adults. Some of the most educated adults I've ever met are in this game playing it to unwind from their long days as scientists and teachers and doctors and therapists even. And and so it's this playground where you have an avatar on your desktop. It's a free game, and you just go and explore and learn. And you're on this journey of remembering how to be part of a village. And so, looking at their community design, they've built all these different pathways and quests and adventures to teach humans how to be kind to each other again, and how to have successful microtransactions of helping each other, until as you play it further and further, there's more and more incentive to do cooperative behavior with other people to get your needs met within that gaming space. And the camaraderie and the kindness that this game builds, and the lack of toxicity in the online chat in any instance for many months I've been looking at this, is really mind-blowing to me. I think they have solved something around how to allow us to be playful and do things like hunt together, or be have a little adrenaline rush with the competition or whatever, but also keep coming back to, did I help somebody right now?
Yeah.
How do we be kind to each other? And how do we take the reward off of that to assume the positive intent we might not have all the evidence for in each other?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to say I'm playfully angry with you because now I know what I'm going to be doing for the next 6 months.
I'll give you my username.
It sounds like a fun game. I really love that, and I'd like to lean that into one of the questions that showed up in the chat. First of all, shout out to Michael Tharrington and Todd Jones. Thank you so much for jumping in and saying hello. Anybody else who's out there in the stream would love to hear from you as well. But Michael, it's sort of a lengthy question that he asked, but I'll kind of lean into just the first part of it a little bit because I think you're alluding to it with Palia as a game too. How do you go about crafting an effective code of conduct for online spaces, whether you're doing it for a corporate space or a B2C, kind of experience like a game or something like that? Like, I've seen a lot of different versions of codes of conduct. It's sort of like the law of the land, for a space, and maybe how you go about.
I love that question. So I'm a nerd about codes of conduct. When I'm in an online space, even just on my computer, but also in immersive reality, no matter who I'm with, if I see a code of conduct up, I'm stopping and taking a picture. I've collected probably thousands at this point.
Wow.
And I do that partly because later I'll go back and check sometimes if I'm really invested or interested in the community to see how often it's changing. My hope is to see changes every time. I don't most of the time. And so what I think happens, especially when we add the business element, is that we live in a world of rules that are black and white. And so we believe that creating a community system has those rules also, but we don't remember that the culture itself does not necessarily evolve off the rules. It evolves off of norms. And so I look at rules as the final expression of consistent norms. But the norms are always going to be testing those rules. There's new people coming in, there's misunderstandings, there's product problems, there's world events that are going to make us test those boundaries. And the thing in the middle is guidelines. The guidelines are kind of the softer boundaries where we're saying, this is what we think has made the magic of this space. And so I look at those three levels as a cycle and that it needs to keep being tested. And the way that that evolution tends towards rules is values, our personal values and our community values. And I see so many communities, air quotes, that do not advertise their values, or more commonly, they don't talk about their values ever. And I can ask anybody in the average community like this, what are the values of this community? And they're like, what? And then I'll say, what are your values? And they're like, what? So community is where we can learn what values are, but it's also where we can forget values. And rules are part of what can make us forget our values because there's no point. The container is concrete and set. And so the never-ending struggle for community managers and moderators is how to hold some cushion and some flexibility in those guidelines and allow for the possibility that sometimes the rule needs to be changed. It needs to be modified. And so I look at the code of conduct as a draft, a never-ending world's worst draft kind of thing. And it's criticism of it is invited, and it's a rigorous practice of saying, how do we do better for more in a sustainable way?
And to pick up on something that I think I heard you say, like that there's not going to be a one size fits all for a code of conduct. It's going to be influenced by what the values of that particular community are. And it's going to be fluid over time then? So so if I'm managing a corporate B2B community,
Mhm.
maybe that means I'm reviewing the code of conduct on a quarterly basis to think about like,
Yeah.
all
Well,
right,
and I
we saw these behaviors here. We think maybe we need to revise rule number 3 or something like that.
Yeah. And I would also say before we revise that rule, how do we grow little pockets of people talking about variations of it, even in something vague like, hey, what do you all see in similar communities, similar setups that work really well for you and
Yeah,
build a healthy culture?
love
And
that.
and asking and interacting, especially with your power users or whales or whatever you want to call it, depending on the context, and really listening to them as community leaders, even if they don't yet know that's the influence they have.
Yeah.
Identify those people that when a friction, when a conflict is coming up, somebody else says something and people calm. That's your
Mhm.
community leader. And businesses, because they are many times for profit, seem to struggle with nurturing and keeping community leaders happy. They more often will cultivate a type of leadership that is more an influencer, where influencers have many times in the stereotype of it a primary loyalty to themselves and are using that power and influence to build themselves up first. And community leaders actually have the flip of that motivation. They are there for a protection, a camaraderie, and a collaboration with the group. And they will be born naturally, constantly. There's always these like pop ups where it's like, whoa, that was leadership. You spent extra to make sure that people could find each other. And so, one of the pieces about growing a culture of norms and a code of conduct that doesn't feel punitive, it feels enlivening. It makes us all remember how to be better with each other, is the ultimate goal of that code of conduct. And so, one of the ways to look for that is how are the community leaders doing? And what do we do to explore the safety we want to feel, while also understanding sometimes the way we make a safe space is to be brave together. And
Mhm.
that means having vulnerable, real, and awkward moments online and bringing a sincerity to all interactions. Because especially if I'm in any kind of position of power as a moderator or manager or whatever, my response to that one person who might be snagging or stepping out of line is a message to the entire community around how much compassion they may receive if they step over that line. And so not looking at them as the problem user, but looking at it as a reflection. You started this meeting today with talking about dragons, right? Which was brilliant because I don't look at the individual person as a dragon. I look at the group as the dragon. And
Mhm.
that individual person is the mouthpiece of that fire. And I have to trust that that fire is in other people. They just haven't said it. This is the first one to pop. And how I respond to them could ripple back into the rest of that creature
Wow.
and redirect that creature to keep lighting our campfires and not our village.
I love that. That's amazing. um, so that creating brave moments or moments of bravery, I think you described. That kind of dovetail for me for one of the other metrics that you talked about in our last conversation, our private conversation. You talked about the time to courage
Mm,
as,
mm,
as an approach.
mhm.
And I'm wondering if we could spend maybe the last little bit of our conversation here today getting into that, because there's an amusing other side
Mhm.
of that that you said is what some game organizations
Yes,
refer to as time to penis.
yes, we are saying that today. And that's real. And technically, in a lot of spaces online, if I wrote time to penis out like that, I would get censored, right? And
Wow.
yet,
Yeah.
this is a really important conversation. So, I have learned by my exposure working in more and more in tech and in the gaming industry that there is a informal metric that is talked about freely within game designers called time to penis. If a space that is being played in has any ability to modify or interact, how quickly will those users construct something very phallic looking or draw it or whatever else, or say it if they can speak? Like, it always feels like a penis will arrive imminently, right? And so the I as a female passing person in the tech world have been affected by all of these phallic images and jokes, etc. It is a burnout piece just from the frequency of it, if nothing else. And what I've had to learn to do is flip that conversation, because people kind of smirk and giggle whenever it comes up. But they also then shut down the creativity of the space, and they go into over controlling it, like locking down that zipper or whatever. And it isn't about that. That actually makes a sterile space where nobody can find each other, basically. And so I have proposed in writing and in many conversations to stop looking for where the penis will show up and start focusing on how much time does it take for somebody to speak courageously. And I say it like that because courage can sometimes come across as very harsh and stern and shaming and blaming. And that doesn't mean it's not courage. It just hasn't been channeled or honed to be resonant and compassionate and actually achieve the effect we want. So I'm going to give you a virtual world example because it's just like stories help us remember, right? I came into a public space. There was a frog avatar, somebody that looked like a poison dart frog, running around with a pen in this space and just drawing this, very simple, sketch of penises all over the world. And I was interacting with some people and just watching the space slowly fill up with all these penises. And then everybody left except this frog and I. And I was thinking of leaving, but then he came close to me and drew another one. And I said hello, and he nodded at me, shocked anybody was saying anything to him. And I said, can I ask you why you draw that? And he shrugged his shoulders. He indicated he didn't know. And I said, do you like to draw? And he shrugged his shoulders. And I said, would you like to go somewhere where other people are drawing in here and they're drawing other things than penises? And he nodded his head. So I took him on a little world hop, and I eventually got to introduce him to a creator who also draws in the air, kind of like a sand mandala. It'll disappear when you leave. He draws in the air in these instances, and he draws dragons, and he draws these dinosaurs, and they are stunning, like hundreds and hundreds of strokes. And I got to bring that creator in to meet this frog guy and take him to an art world where they could do some art together. And so this was this kind of symbolic moment for me to be like, maybe this is the first expression of art for this guy. He's trying to get people's attention, and he's actually repelling people. And so time to courage is, how do we recognize that, yes, that is obtrusive, it is invasive, and it is not done with conscious intention to belong together. But it doesn't mean that's not the need. And so I think that time to courage is us looking for, how do we step up and ask a better question here? And when we do that, when we offer curiosity, when somebody is probably going to expect hostility or control, that changes it from being a potential connective space to being a present moment. We are inventing this script now because I did something I wasn't expected to do.
That is such a powerful example, too, and it makes me think of when we have people in our online communities that are expressing themselves transgressively against our code of conduct or whatever we have. It's important to look beyond that to the motivation. I mean, I think, what I clearly saw with the tree frog person that you're talking about here with their avatars, they needed something, but they didn't know how to express it.
Exactly. Yes.
And they didn't know how to do it in a pro-social way, right?
It was a caveman style of going, I think there's more,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I can do this thing. I'm just going to do this thing until somebody notices me, and
a lot of flags.
It's maybe not a well-expressed intent. And it didn't sound like it was hostile either.
No. And I think that was what was notable. It was kind of nonchalant of sorts. He would run over to different groups that were talking and just draw some penises around them and then go to the next one. And I was like, okay, this might not mean what I feel like it does mean sometimes.
But even in cases like where there's somebody that is out and out trolling or attacking someone else in the space, like, obviously we need to call out the behavior or recognize it, or do we? Or
so there's a magical trick called asynchronous communication. There's a really good Radiolab episode on this if you want to look it up. It's an NPR show that explores explores human perspectives in a variety of ways. And asynchronous communication has worked miracles with all of my online interactions and eventually in-person interactions, which is basically when people are treating us from a place of hostility or reaction or obvious projection, like this is not about me. We don't have to respond in our nonverbals to that part. We can actually hold the possibility that they are having a very severe moment of undoing and speak to the them that is still okay, that is still wanting to be in relationship. So I did something called the Troll Project, which has a website you can look up. But I interviewed trolls mid-trolling in VR for over a year. And I used a lot of asynchronous communication to walk up to somebody or some buddies. I would do this with groups too, who were harassing and saying the most harmful, vile things to somebody to cause them to wilt, to cause them to be terrified. And I would walk up to that and pretend like they were just washing a car or something and be like, hey, do you have a moment? I actually have some questions about trolling. Would you be willing to answer them and tell me what you know about it? And I got 9 out of 10 times people would instantly stop what they were doing and turn around, grab a drink, say 1 sec, they would hydrate, and they'd say, okay, what do you want to know? And what I started to understand was this is not an expression of attachment to that identity, to that behavior. This is a painful expression of need. And when I acknowledge that there's need there, but not condemn how it's coming out immediately, we begin a conversation that starts the negotiation on how to be part of this space better.
So powerful. I wanted to thank Michael Farrington. He dropped the link to the Troll Project out in the chat as well. Some great comments from Joe and Todd Jones as well. I can't believe we're coming to the end of our hour here. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface from all of this. But I think that you've pointed us to some resources that I think are places for us to explore as community builders. To go a little deeper with some of those conversations. And then, of course, there was bridgemakers.world that I hope that the people will check out and go to from here. I guess before we go, what's one change that you would like to see in moderation practices for online communities right now? Like maybe it's a word you'd like to banish. I think you maybe already mentioned like conflict resolution is maybe a word you'd like to get replaced utterly. And again, I'm asking a very unfair question because it's a field that you've got a lot of nuance and breadth in.
Well, I think I'm glad you asked that, because back to the question about code of conduct, I would really challenge anybody who listens to this, and continue to challenge myself to be a bit of a nerd with me and take pictures of those guidelines and those codes of conduct and compare them to yours. Because I think when we get to the place where we say we do not tolerate bigotry or harassment or whatever, what we're doing there is we're saying we take this seriously and we will respond to it, but we also shut down a conversation that needs to be continually happening about consent and about what it means to give each other feedback. We eliminate conflict out of our communities because we know how many fires can start, but we don't realize that micro expressions of conflicts are important to demonstrate corrective, healthy, transformative culture. And so taking words that are black and white out of your code of conduct and softening them to be more like guidelines that are saying, we encourage nonviolent communication. If there are disputes, we want to be involved in a culture that can be genuine and honest and also respectful. There are ways to match the culture and the product and whatever you're doing in how you write those words to really show people you worked to try to be kind to them and not assume they were going to do something that could get them instantly banned. Yeah. Even though that is a possibility, that isn't necessarily what should ever be up in front as an advertisement for your space. And there is a paradox in not tolerating intolerance, but part of how we build tolerance is moments of lowest risk and lowest harm to be listened to and responded to in what we believe, even if it's harmful.
That's amazing. There's so many more questions I want to ask you here, but should we be phrasing our community as a code of conduct or as a guidelines?
I encourage the word guidelines because code of conduct, at least for me and some of the people I've talked to about this, elicits almost a militaristic, institutionalized frame. And guidelines are more like, they're like shepherds, they're wings. They're saying, hey, there's a cliff there. Let's not go so close, right? But they're all about the flow. And codes of conduct are basically the notice of you will be shoved out if blah, 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 blah. That's
it sounds tough. Like court-martial to me. Like, like you will be prosecuted if you
it's assuming a punitive justice system and putting it up in front. Yeah. And while we all live within that, communities have the opportunity to not reinforce that the same way and think about reparative justice and transformative justice. Those are messier processes. But what they do is they help us all learn and grow when we have moments of pain. And punitive justice does not. It just tries to shut the pain down.
That's powerful. I love that. So we find ourselves at the end of an hour here that is a promise of like 6 more hours of wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for appearing here and bringing all of these ideas and wisdom to others. This has been absolutely one of my favorite conversations that I've had. If people want to get in touch with you, potentially even consult with you for your work, what's a good way to reach out?
Yeah, so my business, where I do coaching, consulting, workshops around conflict resiliency and community building, is figuredin.org, which I hadn't given you there, so sorry about that. But bridgemakers.world is where you can see our website and look at us through our YouTube channel. We stream a lot of our events. So you're going to see, if you look at the most recent video from a few days ago, I'm a dinosaur in one of these videos having a conversation with 2 other dinosaurs about an upcoming event. So you will see a whole variety of semi-role play and very real vulnerable things happening in our streams. But that's a way for you to stay in touch a bit and get some exposure to how are we using our online spaces to do courageous and brave things. And then the last place you could reach out to me is through the Buy Me a Coffee app. I'm learning to give the little asks in the world instead of the big asks. So yeah, and there's some links I think that are being posted here, like my LinkedIn account. You can also use that. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to reach out, and please don't be a stranger. I love to have these meaningful conversations with people who are in any kind of leadership roles.
That's so wonderful. Dr. Diaz,
Yeah.
Ruth, if I may. Thank you so much for this today, and thank you if you've tuned in and stuck with us through the interview here. I think it's been a fascinating conversation. I hope that you avail yourself of the opportunity to reach out to Dr. Diaz yourself to keep the conversation going. And I am personally a little bit inspired to start collecting more guidelines.
Yeah, we need a wall. Exactly, or a repository.
Yeah, I think there's a notebook LM in my future.
Lovely. Please keep me on that list. Yeah. Yay.
And for those of you who've tuned in, thank you. Please take some time for yourselves. Get away from the screen. Get out into nature. Breathe in the good air. Breathe out the bad. And we will see you back here in a couple of weeks. For my conversation with Jillian Bettledge from Calendly, talking about architecture and community building. And again, please follow and comment and share the love a little bit if you are so inclined on our YouTube channel out on the interwebs. So that being said, we'll go ahead and conclude here today, and we'll see you again in about 2 weeks. Thanks again, Dr. Diaz.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.